Welcome back to another episode of Tank Talks, the podcast that brings you in-depth conversations with leaders in the startup and venture capital ecosystem. I'm your host, Matt Cohen, and on this week's episode, we welcome Sarah Dobson, founder of Design of Brand, to discuss building an authentic startup brand. Sarah and I cover everything from her journey into the creative and design industry, first starting off in New York City, interning at Vogue magazine, and the mentors she studied under. We dig into how Sarah landed her first startup client, Greenhouse Juice, and eventually launched her own design firm that went on to create many iconic startup brands like Ace Valley, Superette, and Rainbow Mushrooms, among others. We touch on the importance of honesty in the branding process and what advice she has for founders looking to launch their first startup idea and logo. Lastly, we cover the importance of trademark IP and copyright when creating brands and why it could be of value later on down the road for startups. Now let's jump into the tank for this week's episode with Sarah Dobson from Design of Brand. Thanks for joining us in the tank today, Sarah.
I'm really happy to be here, Matt. Thank you.
Sarah, I'm super pumped to have you joining us today on the show. You've built so many iconic startup brands in Toronto over the years and across Canada, like Ace Valley, Superette, Greenhouse Juice, Nut Bar, Rainbow Mushrooms, and Sunscoop, among many others. So, we're going to get into all the behind the scenes scoop on how it's all done. But before we dive in, I would love it if you can give our audience a bit of a background on yourself and how you got started in the creative and design industry.
I grew up just in a really creative family, had a really fun childhood, doing lots of sort of arts and crafts and playing around with, paints and food and lots of good stuff. So I had a really good foundation for just exploration and expression through sort of visual outputs. And then I studied history and art history in university. I didn't really know that I wanted to go into more of an applied creative field at the time. And then I remember my mom introducing me to a friend of hers who was a beauty editor of a magazine. And I was sort of peppering her with questions because I loved magazines, as a teenager, obviously. And I used to find so much joy in decorating the covers of my agendas in high school and my friends' lockers for their birthdays and things like that. And I remember this meeting I had with her. She said, if I could do it all over again, I would really want to go in the art department at the magazine. They're just the best people. They have so much fun. And so I did an internship there. And that's when I realized what graphic design was and that it was sort of this perfect container for all the things that I just loved doing naturally.
And so you ended up taking that to the next level, right? You ended up working at Vogue and Teen Vogue in New York. That must have been a wild time. I mean, I'm picturing The Devil Wears Prada, but I know that wasn't exactly what it was like, or was it exactly like that?
I actually had a very Devil Wears Prada moment where I was working on a book for Vogue that a teacher of mine, I was in school at the time, had brought me in to work on. And she told me, don't look at Anna Wintour in the eyes. And this one day, Anna came into the office to check on our progress. And of course, I looked her straight in the eyes and I lived to tell the tale. So it was a little bit that energy, but
she's that scary in person for sure.
I didn't think so. I don't know why people are scared of her, honestly, but maybe I was just young and I don't know.
Excited about it. Yeah. Well, who were some of your mentors that you looked up to, even before your time working at Vogue, growing up in a design family? Like, who are people you looked up to besides obviously your parents and your mom?
My first job out of school was for a man named Michael Gordon who started Bumble and Bumble. Do you know that hair care company?
No. I know Joico.
Yep. Along those lines. Anyway, Bumble was just sort of revered, I suppose, at the time of just having cool packaging. Like I remember seeing it and it's quite expensive. And I remember being like, oh, it's so cool. But yeah, he developed this incredible company and built this sort of school of hair care and this really like organic culture around hairdressing. And so I was super happy to work with him. He'd sold the company to Estee Lauder at the time. And so, yeah, I learned a lot from him about just sort of the culture that goes behind having a really, I think, valuable business. And then I was incredibly lucky to, basically I went from that job to knowing that I wanted to sort of learn more of the business side of things. And I ended up working for the first female partner at Pentagram. And Pentagram, for those of you who don't know, when I was in graphic design school, Pentagram was like the holy grail of places you could work at. It was like, bow down. And Paula being the first female partner was, just like a legend and one of the most famous graphic designers in the field. And a friend of mine from school had interned there, and I reached out to sort of grab coffee with him, and he said, we're actually looking for a new sort of team manager at the time. And so I ended up working for Paula on her team, and just learning so much from her about, how to sell design, how to think about identity for big corporations. She's done so many sort of iconic brands like Citibank, the High Line, almost every public arts institution in New York, like MoMA and the Public Theater. And there's actually an amazing episode on the Netflix series Abstract on her. It's like episode 6, I think, if you're interested. But
episode 6, as in you've watched it probably like 60 times?
Yeah, no, it was filmed right after I left, and I was like, oh shoot.
It could have been you. Could have been you. I mean, you saw probably so many amazing projects there.
Oh yeah. And it was one of the big moments, I think, was when she'd done Shake Shack and it IPO'd. And I was like, Paul, how do you not have any options in Shake Shack? This identity is so iconic. And, we kept having to send paperwork to Shake Shack to show that they'd paid for the identity because it kept getting, copied all over the world. And she taught me so much, I think, about typography. She has this quote that's fairly well known, that words have meaning and typography has feeling, and the combination is spectacular. I always think about that.
You got to see, though, I feel like a lot of overlapping between like designing, creativity, business, equity in creating valuable brands. We'll get into sort of like that intellectual property rights and ownership, but also just like maybe getting paid in equity versus cash as a creative design agency, which I know you've done on some of the projects you've worked on. People always think about like that Facebook graffiti design artist who worked there early on in the first office and became like a multimillionaire from those options. And that story, I feel like, kind of excites a lot of people to try to take their chances at that as well. But after moving back from New York, your first big design work was in the creation of Greenhouse Juice Company's logo and identity, correct?
Yeah, we did Greenhouse when I was still at Pentagram, actually. That was sort of the first side project that I did there.
So tell us about that, sort of like, how did you come across the team there? For our audience who may not know Greenhouse Juice, maybe explain the vision behind the brand, and like, why do you think it became so successful?
One of the founders was a great friend of mine in New York, Sophie Green, and she got me involved, and her brother was sort of leading the charge with the brand and the company alongside a couple of other founders. And I was in New York, so I could see sort of the writing on the wall, which was the same thing that they noticed, right? There's juices all over New York and LA, and Toronto really didn't have anything like that. And they had their eye on this really special location on McPherson and had finally got it. So they were sort of all systems go. They were chomping on names as well. And yeah, I jumped in and really, I think this was my first start to sort of systematizing this idea. Through the identity, you're really trying to capture the spirit of the people that are involved. And I think Anthony, as sort of like the main decision maker of this company, and his partner Emma, who's just a brilliant, like incredible writer, trying to sort of meld their characters, this sort of industrial but warm and friendly vibe. That's what we really tried to do with the mark and the typography there. And we just had so much fun with it. I got Danny, my now business partner, involved to do it. And so this was also our first foray into really working together, because we'd already met in New York. And it just went so well. And the logo and the type really hasn't changed since we first did it. And that was over 10 years ago now,
Wow. It's so simple. It's so simple. It's so crisp. And it really is exactly what you're saying. Industry meets like clean and healthy living. Explain to us more about the process. Let's dig into that. Like, what do you typically try to accomplish in these first meetings with a new client? And how long does it usually take to land on that vision for a new brand and identity?
In the first meeting, we really go through all sort of the basics of the business, right? Like, what does the company do? How are we talking about that already? I mean, it also depends on whether we're doing naming or not. There's a couple different focal points when we're doing naming, but what are the simplest ways you can describe what the business is doing? And then, of course, what's the vision you have for it, once it's up and running or however many years down the line? What makes your business different from other people? Like, really practically speaking, what can you claim that no one else can? We really try and dig in on that. How did you get into this? The inspiration behind the business, that's always really important to talk about. And then just really like what problems you're solving for your customers, who are your competitors, how do you want people to describe your brand, things like that. And really just get as deep of an understanding of what we want the business to feel like once we've worked on it.
It really feels like a pitch meeting for us as like early stage investors at Ripple. But I feel like you can be a lot more honest because you're coming in as like a strategic partner almost at the very early days when they're still humble about like what they could actually be. So how important is honesty in the branding process? And what happens if a new client that you're talking to about their brand and idea and their vision just sounds like shit? Like, can you tell them that first off? Do you have any stories about that?
I love this question. I think honesty is just the most important thing. And I love the time that I get to interact with business owners because they really are looking for, expertise and honest feedback, I think. And I'm certainly not shy about telling people, usually they either, if they have an existing business, they know that it needs work and they're sort of like, we need help. But names are so important too, right? Like I'd say I'm very direct with people when I don't like their name. I'm always very open to hearing, what the thinking behind it was if I'm not particularly fond of it. But that is something that I think I've encouraged a few people to change their name, and super happy that they've been able to make those shifts. The one story I had was a woman, a really incredible founder of a very responsibly made hiking boot company. She was a UN lawyer with her husband and left to pursue, sort of making a bigger impact by really like going into great detail on the materials and the way that these shoes are made. And the company was called Allison Whittles. And when we started talking about the project, I said, tell me about the name. And it was sort of a family name and they hadn't really put much thought into it, but they kind of liked it. And I said, I think this name really reads as a fashion brand and not as sort of a responsible, like really sort of progressive, environmentally conscious sort of brand. And she hadn't thought about changing the name, but I think she went around to a couple of other people she was considering to do the branding, and they all said, yeah, the name, it sounds kind of feminine, I think. And she didn't really like that. I guess she liked the more like, this is sort of reads as fashion take on it. So anyway, we went through the whole rebranding process with a new name, which is a bit of an emotional roller coaster as well. There's always like a really scary point of it, but it's now called Thesis, spelled Thesus.
There's something about a great name. Like everyone says like, well, our name was, Air Bed and Breakfast and look how we turned out. Okay. Yeah. But you ended up having to shorten it to Airbnb and, and now people are using it as a verb. If it was Air Bed and Breakfast, I don't think people would have been using it as a verb for this long. So I get the whole idea of like, being honest with your brand and your identity early on, but you got to face the facts. Like a lot of startup founders, at least the ones that we deal with, are like, that's the last thing on their checklist when they're kind of creating a product or some software to make sure it actually has viability or customers or something like that. So how do you explain to a young founder who might not be thinking about spending money on a brand or identity for their first company when they don't think it's really important? What advice would you give them to think about?
Honestly, like sometimes that's okay, right? Sometimes depending on the business, you just need to get the product out there, see if it is wanted and, get some money. And it really depends on the business. I always use this analogy of a car. Like you can spend $500 and get a like clunker that is going to, get you from A to B for like a year. And then you're going to have to spend lots of money repairing it and worrying about it and the stress of like, is it going to break down? Or you could do something more mid-range that's reliable and, or you can spend a ton of money and get this like awesome head turner, like works really well. And so that's sort of the practical thing, but also to think about your brand, like not as a logo or a name, but as this sort of means by which people understand what you're doing, right? It helps people know the essence of what you're doing. And if it's incorrect, then you're just having this sort of confused relationship with how you interact and communicate with people.
It could really hurt you too if it's not the right one. And we can get into that. But if it's the right one, it could sell itself for you without having to invest in like a big sales team.
Coming at honesty from another angle, not only with our clients, but with what we do, we really try to have, the names and visual identity systems we design be an accurate representation of the business and the people. And it's that sort of, you see lots of examples of brands that look a certain way and make you buy it, but then you won't buy it again because you didn't have a great experience or whatnot. So it just is a great sort of tool for that, just like true expression of the business.
Yeah. And also going back to your car example, if you were to buy a clunker and then it ends up becoming like the race leader, but to continue staying the race leader, you actually have to pay a lot more. And converting that to a startup, it's like, well, if you are the next Facebook and your name is something before that, to go out and buy Facebook, it's going to cost you $10 million, and buy the brand and all that stuff because somebody would have come around and probably copied it or bought it before you. And we've seen that story play out as well. Pulling on that thread a bit more, what are your thoughts on trademarks and copyright when creating brands? And do you work with like IP lawyers and recommend that your clients work with someone to get involved early on the copyright side? Because we've obviously seen a lot of infringement issues around the brand industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't really have anyone actually that I recommend in Canada. I had someone in New York at Pentagram, but yeah, it's another issue of, what's the business? How much does it make sense for you to spend on protecting something? Because obviously you can spend tons of money or very little. But yeah, the more common thing that we experience, I'd say, is people, and this is a really delicate, tricky issue. We've never had to really defend it before, but we see a lot of people weaving together elements of our brands that kind of render a similar result, but might not be, completely infringing. They just sort of look the same. I think that's happened with Rainbow. It's happened with Super Ed. It's happened with Greenhouse.
Yeah, we saw DoorDash even infringe on Super Ed's brand completely, like a total ripoff.
That was absolutely wild. Yeah.
Yeah, if you're listening, DoorDash, you better back off.
Yeah. With Sunscoop, they actually came to us because they were infringing with their old name on a similar product. Their old name was Koku, there was coconut-based ice cream. And so they had this, cease and desist, and they had to really change it quite quickly. But I think that was a blessing in disguise. Now Sunscoop seems like a much better name.
Yeah, way better name, and happy to be a small investor. What advice do you have for founders who are thinking about just starting that first company with that shitty Vistaprint logo and design like I did for Ripple, and you can rip on Ripple's logo and our vision whenever you want. And they came to you for advice and they said, I want to create a brand new logo, but I want to do it really cheap and quick. What advice would you give them?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I mean, luckily you have a great name, right, Matt? So like that would be what I would say to you, and a really good thing going. Yeah, I mean, I think in the case that you don't want to spend money, like
it's back to the car example, right?
It's back to the car example. And I would say, honestly, do some research, reach out to a couple of people, bigger agencies, freelancers, get quotes and figure out how much you can afford to spend and who you really want to work with.
I can say for our companies that have had shitty logos and shitty names, like it's been a clusterfuck to try and rebrand and redo it when the company eventually started to have some success. And I wish that they just probably spent the extra couple $1,000s or so to get it done right the first time. And it would have saved them a lot of headache down the road.
Yeah, honestly, it's such a fun process. I would say, like anyone who's thinking about doing it, it's loads of fun. And I can also relate to that because we haven't done anything with my own company's identity. We've just been working our butts off for the past 4 years. And so, I can really relate to that too. But we're going to do that, and it's really exciting to invest that time and that energy into it.
It's a fun process. I've gone through the design process for our own new logo brand, and it was fun. I learned a lot, and now we have that template that we share with our portfolio companies. But let's talk about the creative side. I mean, let's say someone doesn't want to spend the, thousands of dollars to get a new brand and logo design or even naming done with you, but they're willing to give up a little bit of equity. I mean, you talked about how Pentagram could have had options in Shake Shack earlier on. Talk to us about that conversation that founders should be having if it's available to them, and why some firms may be interested in that, and what opportunities did you take equity and that you were happy with and thought that was a great way to build a stronger partnership with the founders?
My approach to this has really been quickly evolving over the course of the past 5 years. For example, really early days before we even really incorporated DOB, I took a stake in a friend's company and took very little cash for that. And now that's evolved to, we tried to create a budget that makes the most sense for the business, that obviously covers kind of our overhead, and we're a small business too, so I think that always needs to be the case. So we get some cash and then try to kind of make up the difference in a stake. And yeah, I'm putting some work into that this year too, in terms of like what our sort of baseline terms for that agreement are. But I just love what that does to our relationships as well, in terms of that mutual respect and trust and ongoing sort of support for each other. It's really lovely.
Yeah, it creates more alignment, and I think founders should be willing to ask for it. And sometimes it may not align with the small business design agency you're talking with, but there are potentially others out there like yours that might be interested in that kind of longer partnership. What startups have you worked with that you were just blown away by the reception it got from the brand, and how much it resonated with the customers, and why do you think that was?
Well, Othership has just been, such a pleasure to see that evolution. So Othership was previously called Inward. It started off at kind of a large group of friends too, kind of focusing all in the same space of saunas, cold plunges, breath work, and all these sort of activities that, help make you a better, happier person. And yeah, so they came together and they prototyped this location with a sauna and a cold plunge and started recording these fantastic breathwork sessions and creating an app. About a year ago, they opened up their first location downtown, which is like a 50-person sauna and has 4 cold plunges. And it was a really in-depth process, I would say, of not only gathering consensus from all the different founders in terms of changing their name from Inward to Othership, but also just remarkable to see the community that they've been able to build around these activities and how popular the downtown location is. It's like always full and everyone really is using it. It feels like in the way that they intended it to be used, which is really just sort of a healthier social experience as an alternative to going to a bar or drinking, right? So just so thrilled for them that it's really taking off and they're opening up some new locations.
Yeah, it's an incredible brand. I assume it has to do with like futuristic, obviously longevity, obviously taking another ship to another planet. These are the people that'll be the chosen ones.
Yeah, the some of the main kind of thinking behind the brand with the name Inward is like, this very internal process, something I'm doing, and something one of the founders, Robbie, expressed to me that, he does all these things so he could be a better person, so he could be in better relationship, be a better partner to his wife and his friends, and, and do all the things he does better. And so I think that name was meant to express that, doing these things for yourself so that you can be in better relationships with lots of people. The mark was really inspired by sort of a spinning top, sort of this idea of like continual play. And I think that all the things that they put out there have this sense of just play and just fantastic energy. And so that was where that came from.
Can you explain maybe like that dopamine hit that you get when you nail a logo or a design after going through so many iterations? I mean, I can't imagine the hours you spend just kind of, in your team, obviously you and Danny kind of noodling around with different lines, different curves, different color schemes. And then obviously you just show it to a client and they're like, wow. And it just hits. Like, what is that feel like?
Oh yeah, it truly is the best feeling. I'm somewhat like, doing a cold plunge. I'm absolutely addicted to those moments after presentations when people are so happy and excited. And yeah, there's a couple sort of inflection points in the process. I think I like to use meditation and whatnot to think of ideas. And I think those moments when you're like, oh my gosh, we should try this or use that. And those are really exciting as well. But yeah, I think working with Danny and our little team now to finesse the expression visually is also just such a rewarding process.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, tell us a bit more about your firm. It's called Design of Brand. Very straight to the point, I must say. What has been the strategy with the firm and the team, and where are you kind of taking it in this next iteration?
I guess I started DOB with that sort of designing the process that we now use for our clients, for myself, sort of like what's your big why, basically. What do you want to accomplish in the world? And I sort of synthesized that I really wanted to work with entrepreneurs to give power to younger companies through really strong branding, right? Yeah, I think right now with the team, we're just sort of finessing our systems continually, always, and trying to create that base structure for growth so that we can, because I think one of the biggest pain points I have is just not being able to, work with everyone who reaches out to us. Our bandwidth is so limited. So right now, I think we're kind of in that like special op, well-oiled kind of machine. And now I'm just kind of figuring out how we can responsibly grow it.
So how do you typically choose which clients to work with if you're overwhelmed with so much inbound?
A lot of it is timing. Yeah, it's just, we kind of come up for air sometimes. I'm trying to get a bit better at that. Yeah, of course, it's just like, do they have an interesting idea? Do we have that really nice sense of mutual respect and trust? Of course, when we're taking stakes in companies, I look at their abilities to really operate, their experience with that, and then ability to raise, obviously, as well.
It must be hard though, like for us, we're meeting 10,000 companies a year. We're obviously looking at their viability as people from an entrepreneurial standpoint, but also from operators and business people. For you, it must be much harder because you could fall in love with the vision and the brand and may not necessarily really understand the market dynamics or the competitive landscape or the technology if it's a tech company. And so that must be really hard for you. So we should talk more. We should have more of a relationship on the investment side.
Absolutely. I would love that. I mean, for me, it's so intuitive, right? I feel like that's one of like those things I was very lucky to meet Simon Sinek also a couple of years ago. And when I met him, he sort of like chatted about that big why thing. And it helped me sort of synthesize one of the things. I've had other people tell me this is like a weakness. You always see the best in people, but I really do bring that like, let's bring the best of this to the forefront and through the identity. And I think it's plays well and with what I do, and it feels good. But yeah, do you have like specific things you look for with clients, or is there sort of an element of intuition with that too?
Yeah, we definitely have some like quick knockout questions that we are very interested in asking. First question, not first, but one of the earlier questions we always ask is like, why is this a problem that you want to dedicate the next 10 years of your life to? Like, why is this so important to you? Like the why for you, not for the world, but for you is a big one. And then the other thing is like, if I handed you like $10 million, would you just sell the whole company to me right now? And just to see what their motivation is. Like, are they really interested in building $1 billion, 10-year business, or are they just interested in quickly flipping this idea and then moving on to the next one? Because if they're going to take my cash and run with it, that means that they're valuing my cash more than their equity in something that they were just pitching me 5 seconds ago as being the next, big, industrial revolution idea. So I need to really get to the crux of that. And we do a lot of reference checks early on, even though there's still nothing to show for it from like a quantitative standpoint. The qualitative point of these people that we're betting on is important to us. And so we get a lot of those things done very early. But, like I said, we see 10,000 companies a year. So we've got a little practice in doing that. But we're happy to share all that with you. What would be your long-term vision for DOB? What's your design choice for your brand? Because as you said, it hasn't changed much. It's still date of birth. So what is the vision there?
I just want to be able to reach people. I think one of my bigger pain points right now is that I can't responsibly to my own business work with people under a certain budget. And I would like to solve for that a little bit. And then kind of on a bigger scale, I would, I do love these bigger projects where we do take stakes, but also I'd really like to incubate a lot of, not a lot, but a couple of ideas that I have. I started DOB kind of with a list of a couple different brands I wanted to pursue building, or companies I would have liked to pursue. Basically assessed like all these different things, who I want to work with, how I like to spend my time, and various other components.
What I think would be a lot of fun is if you could, now that we're kind of in a little bit of a free fall here with early stage founding companies, if you could buy some online e-commerce businesses that are like trading at like fractions of even their sales price, and then just throw a quick like rebrand on the business through your own lens of what you think the product really should have looked like or should have been called. And then, but you've already got like an existing cash flowing business that you can use to fund it. And then you would skip the whole like ideation part and just get right to work selling something that's already being sold, but under a new brand and logo and design. So you can pay me for that idea later.
I don't know though, Maddie, like all the ideas that I have, like Scruncheroo is a good example of that, where it's like making something kind of new and different, whether it's the form factor, the material, or
you like to start with a fresh canvas, I feel.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I've also thought a lot about like approaching companies that I really like. Berries, for example. I love Berries, but I would never wear any of the merch. I still feel like it has a bit, too much of that kind of military.
It's very masculine, army, military. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's such a good workout. And I think a lot of people are scared of it.
That's an interesting question. Which brands do you not resonate with on the brand side, but you love the product or the service a lot?
Ooh.
Costco's got to be one.
Yeah. Yeah, Berries is a big one. What other, I would put this in the cringy category. I mean, this is going to be the answer to my favorite tech product, but Whoop as well. I work with a functional medicine doctor, and he told me to get a Whoop a while ago, and I was like, absolutely not. Like, that is so off-brand for me. And even when I first got it, I was like, I hate this thing. I feel like I have like a tracker on me. I've I'm on house arrest or something. And I don't love being a really now passionate Whoop user, but it's really changed my life. I absolutely love it.
That's amazing. So sometimes you just have to bite your tongue and say, okay, I don't really resonate with this brand, but I know how good it will be for me long-term. And Whoop's a great example. Who are your favorite clients to work with? And they could be like friends or just like people that you obviously resonate with the ideas with, but you obviously seem to find people that really resonate with you on a lot of things besides just working together. You have a lot of a conversion between personal and professional relationships.
Yeah, that was something I couldn't have expected, honestly, when I started doing what I was doing. But some of my quote unquote clients or friends, there's just so much intersection now. Two of my best friends I've done brands for, and it's sort of like chicken and the egg. Like, I don't know if our friendships came first or our brands, kind of solidified the depth of our friendships. But yeah, I think just people who are entrepreneurially inclined that is obviously the focus of our whole business. But yeah, it's just really fun because almost every year I feel like I make a couple of really genuine, true new friends just from going through the process together.
A lot of people say like don't become friends with your founders from our perspective as venture investors. And I totally disagree with that. I find it a more enjoyable experience, even if the company's not doing well. You know, if companies are shutting down, like you still want to have a personal relationship with these people. They're human beings. They're not just like numbers. And so I disagree with people who say not having personal relationships with the founders that we back. And it sounds like you like to have the same sort of philosophy with the clients that you work with as well. Well, before we jump into our fast favorites, last question, you know, how can people find you and get in touch with you and your firm, even though you're kind of drinking from a fire hose now with a ton of design requests, you know, how should people get in touch with you?
You can email me, sarah@designofbrand.com, or our Instagram is @designofbrand.
So let's jump into our fast favorites section. So first off, your favorite podcast.
I'm going to shout out Tanya's Rainbow podcast.
And what is Rainbow?
Sorry, Rainbow is a line of medicinal mushroom tinctures.
I'm a happy customer, and that is spelled RAINBO, and that's a brand that you created and designed, correct?
Yes.
Absolutely amazing. Second, your favorite newsletter or blog?
I don't know if it does count as a newsletter, actually. My business partner, Danny, has this incredible, I don't know what you call it, sort of a collection of playlists. She sort of scours for unknown songs or lesser known songs and creates these beautiful thematic playlists with accompanying newsletters. And that is called Sift Q.
I'm going to check that out. Sift Q. And that's basically like curation of indie music playlist for songs that are a bit more off the beaten path.
Exactly.
Very cool. And next, you've already answered this, but tell us why, again, your favorite tech gadget is?
The Whoop. Yeah, I just have become evangelical about it. It's helped me improve my well-being over the course of the past year tremendously.
What has been the biggest change you've seen probably from using it?
Just pushing myself, I think, to sleep. You know, I transitioned actually from an Aura to a Whoop. And I think what the Whoop has done was just gives you so much more data around your habits with the journal function, pushing your strain and kind of thinking it as like cardiovascular health instead of just steps. So I feel like I've really improved my athletic ability over the course of the past year, which was just a game changer after COVID. I was just, sitting way too much and not pushing myself at all. So it was great.
So I think this might answer your next question, which is favorite new trend.
Yeah, wearables. I just, again, think it's had such a...
You were anti-wearables for a bit. I mean, you had the Aura ring, but it was garbage. And now you're saying you're on to the next
No, I loved
thing.
the Aura too. I surprised myself with that appetite for data on my health. And I think after reading Lifespan and going in deep on a new project that's sort of in underground, which you know about, sort of building a community underground right now, learning basically about biohacking over the course of the past year, I just have a new sort of respect for that data you can get.
Yeah, I feel like because you're at the very ground level of so many like projects that people are ideating, you spend a lot of time like absorbing what they're feeling towards a project, and that kind of like gets ingested by you, and you start to like, consume it and think about it a lot, and it takes over your like mental capacity, right?
Absolutely. But the fun thing is we get to choose what we dig in on, right? And so in this case, where I have a stake in the company and we're naming and we're creating this whole thing from scratch, it's just such a pleasure. It's really life-changing every time we do it, especially as most of our projects.
Sounds like a great way to work, that's for sure. I don't think a lot of consulting professionals can say that about their jobs when they take on new projects for like Procter & Gamble or something. Yeah. And last but not least, your favorite life lesson.
It was this, I think it's an Eckhart Tolle quote. It's like, enlightenment is the space between your thoughts. And I don't know about enlightenment, but I really do try to get in that kind of state of having a bit of a blank canvas where your thoughts can arise, and such interesting takeaways from those moments.
Yeah, it's like that saying, like the happiest moments is that moment just as you're waking up before you open your eyes, but you're done dreaming, but you're not fully awake, and there's just empty thoughts. I kind of have that every time I take a cold bath in the morning. Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much for joining us in the tank today with Sarah Dobson, founder of Design of Brand.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Tank Talks. To learn more about this episode, be sure to go to Apple Podcast or Spotify to find more detailed notes on this episode or to check out previous episodes. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review and a rating, as it helps us out a lot. And hit that subscribe button so you can get notified when new episodes come out. Finally, make sure to give me a follow on Twitter @MattyBCohen or @Tank Talk Podcast to stay up to date on new episodes or to be a guest on our show. Till next time,